Okay, here we go. It is an emergency edition of Canucks Conversation. Dave Quadrelli alongside Harman Dial. Our technical producer, Batten pinch hitter today is Jacob Lazare joining us. Usually our clip guy. Everybody's asking about those clips looking so good at Canucks Army. That is thanks to our pal Jacob, who is producing today because Grady's off doing Sakaris and Price. So we got resources all over the place. So it's an emergency edition of Canucks Conversation, and I am excited about this news. Harm, the domino has fallen. Right now, we've gotten news that Filip Hronek has signed an 8-year deal at an annual average value of $7.25 million with your Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, so right off the bat, with all the talk throughout the season about he might be pushing for closer to $8 million, I had been worried about what is that cap hit going to look like on a long-term deal. I can live with this cap hit. It came in a little bit lower than I think a lot of us had sort of anticipated. That doesn't mean it's cheap, right? It's still an expensive figure. I also look at 8 years. It's probably a year or two longer than you would have ideally been hoping for. But the contract is palatable. It's not an egregious overpayment, which I think a lot of us were worried about when we were discussing the potential of a Hronek long-term deal. So right off the bat, it's something you can live with for a player who is a perfect fit for Quinn Hughes.
Yeah, perfect fit for Quinn Hughes. There's a lot of different angles for this. Let's start with the contract, Harm, which, as I said, 8 years at $7.25 million. My initial reaction to this is that, and hey, we're gonna have a lot of new listeners of the show every time we do an emergency episode. But I've been saying for the past couple of weeks that I think on July 1st, the contracts that are going to be signed, especially among defensemen, especially among right-handed defensemen, are probably going to surprise a lot of people. Let's not forget, just in recent off seasons, what Eric Goodbranson got, what Luke Shen got. And I'm not saying that those are the ones that, the Canucks are looking at or anything like that. But ultimately, this is a right shot defenseman that we know is capable of playing those top pair minutes. He's a number 2-3 defenseman. He's not a true number one. But ultimately, you have Quinn Hughes' partner locked up for 8 years. And right now, this number looks good. This number going forward, I think, is only going to look better.
Yeah, and you have to remember, Jalen Chatfield just recently got $3 million from the Carolina Hurricanes on a 3-year extension. So the market is already starting to become a little bit inflated. And yeah, it's also easy to look at guys like Matt Roy and Chris Tanev, Brett Pesce, say those guys would be quality top 4 right-handed defensemen. But I worry about what their contracts would look like given how many teams have cap space this summer because of the lift in the salary cap ceiling. But also B, they're not perfect fits with Hughes the way Hronek is. And what I mean by that is players like Roy, Tanev, they're more a perfect fit, honestly, on the second pair with a Carson Soucy. And why I say that is look at the way Rick Tocchet deployed his blue line in the playoffs. He used that Soucy-Myers pair to go up against Connor McDavid, and the Quinn Hughes pair wasn't used in a tough matchups role. So what happens if you bring in a pure shutdown right shot defender like a Roy or a Tanev? Well, I would bet that the coaching staff would actually use that defenseman on the second pair with Soucy because they want that jumbo-sized shutdown pair rather than playing that player with Hughes. Not to mention, it takes something away from Hughes offensively relative to what Hronek can do, the way he can read off Hughes, the playmaking chops that he has, the IQ that he has in the offensive zone. So those things matter. And also, just big picture, I think you look at the way the Canucks constructed this blue line, the thought process that went into it, it's almost like the Canucks are banking on having one elite top pair, and then rather than having a stacked second pair and a typical third pair, it's more elite top pair and then an okay bottom 4 that's filled up of number 4-5 caliber defensemen, because they made it to round 2 of Game 7 with, on paper, a second pair that doesn't light the world on fire in Soucy and Myers, and yet they were able to get away with it for most of the regular season because it wasn't just that Vancouver's top pair was good. It wasn't even just that they were great. It's that they had, for most of the season, the best goal differential of any first pair in the NHL. Even if you had found a decent partner for Hughes, there's a chance that there would have been a drop-off, and all of a sudden now your blue line, without getting a plus 30 5-on-5 goal differential from a Hughes top pair. Now you have a blue line group that doesn't work quite the same way.
Ultimately, how long have we been talking in this market about a good defenseman, but after Quinn Hughes, a really good right shot defenseman, right? Like they went out and traded for this guy. This was their target, and they ended up going out and getting him. It would have been a bad look if they had lost him and then had to replace him. And someone in the chat brought it up earlier, the YouTube live chat here, saying, what if he goes away and they don't replace him, or they struggle to replace him? How different is this conversation where we're talking about, yeah, you can't overpay for Hronek? I certainly don't think this is an overpay. Someone else in the chat kind of echoed my feelings about it not being this isn't a phenomenal contract or anything. I think it's a good deal for the team. And then moving forward, I think it has the potential to really, really be a good deal when you look at it around the rest of the league and what's being signed. You've talked a lot, and we've talked a lot about how important it is to have Quinn Hughes replacement be a certain type of player. And you touched on that a lot there. Let's talk about Hronek, the player, because it was a good first half. It was an okay second half, kind of fell off a little bit there. We know he was dealing with an injury down the stretch, but Hronek, the player.
Before I dive into that, I also should mention that this isn't a player that's about to turn 30 by the start of next season. He's still 26 years old, which matters in the sense that he's younger than a lot of the other potential free agent targets that you may have been looking at on the open market. Now, as a player, what stands out about him is really in the offensive zone, how smart he is, his decision-making. He's one of those rare players as well that has the booming shot from the point, but doesn't rely on it too heavily to the point where, like, sometimes guys have a bomb from the point, but they spam inefficient shots and it takes offensive possessions away from their partner, away from the forwards on the ice. Hronek knows even how to leverage his shot as a weapon to open up playmaking and passing lanes. Through the first half of the season, when he was racking up a ton of points, it really struck me how many times he would get the puck at the point. The opposing winger was in the shooting lane, bracing for a shot and ready to collapse, or ready to get down on a knee and block it. And all of a sudden it would open up maybe a diagonal passing lane or a lane to another forward. So that, I think, speaks to the intelligence that he has with the puck. Even early in the year, the way that Hughes and Hronek would interchange off the puck, switch sides, that type of creative movement, I think, is massive, because heading into next year, given that Quinn Hughes is likely going to win the Norris Trophy this year, teams are going to pre-scout. They're going to do their homework on how Hughes manufactures offense. Hughes and that top pair always needs a new trick up its sleeve. I always have confidence that Hughes can develop those next tricks, those next maneuvers, find different ways to attack so he isn't as predictable. But he also needs a partner that can be on the same page as him and read off of him. That's where Hronek is by far the best defenseman on this roster for that responsibility.
So if you're just joining us now, 8 years, $7.25 million per year for Filip Hronek. Let's pull up the contract structure. This courtesy of our pal Frank Saravalli. The contract structure: 2024-25, $5.5 million base salary plus a $4 million signing bonus. The next year, I'm not going to read out each year, folks. Stay with me here. $5 million plus a $4 million signing bonus. The year after that, $6.7 million in salary, no signing bonus. Year after that, 27-28, $4.4 million and a $4 million signing bonus. 28-29, $3.7 million and a $3 million signing bonus. 4.25 plus $2 million signing bonus. 3.7 plus $2 million signing bonus. 3.7 plus $2 million signing bonus. Those last 2 years, the 30-30 and 31 season and the 31-32 season, identical with that $3.7 million and a $2 million signing bonus. 25-28, full no move clause, so that obviously starts next year. And then in 2028 to 2032, it goes down to a 15-team no trade clause. So a front-loaded contract, which we're certainly used to seeing in this market. So front-loaded contract for Filip Hronek. If you're just joining us for the first time, my name is Dave Quadrelli. That is Harman Dial, and we do Canucks Conversation 5 days a week during the regular season. So be sure to subscribe right now in the off season. We're going Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can watch us live on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Interact with us. We have a lot of people interacting. Of course, you can find the podcast version of the show anywhere you get your podcasts, usually around 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time. So make sure you subscribe if you're new here. We've got a lot of new people, and interact with us in the chat. We've got Tim Lyle in the Facebook chat. Say, love this deal. Right defenseman in his prime with this salary. When was the last time the Canucks had a legit top D pair for multiple years in their prime together? That's a good piece of trivia. I'm trying to think about it. Last time the Canucks had a legit top D pair for multiple years in their prime together. I don't know if you can even go to 2011, because what are we considering as multiple years?
I mean, 2011 definitely had that. I mean, how many?
Yes.
and Bieksa, for example, is a shutdown pair. I know they weren't technically the top pair, but they were both top pairing caliber defensemen.
Yes. But how many years were they together? That's my point.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but multiple is just more than one.
That's true. Okay, sure. I'm just looking at it and saying, okay, these guys are going to be together for like the next 8 years. You'd assume, right? So
yeah, I mean, maybe Edler and Tanev, but I don't know if you would consider that like a contender's top pair, given where Edler was at in his career in those later years when the Canucks were like post 2011, when they were pretty bad.
Here's a little take, Harm. People would have appreciated Edler and Tanev a lot more if the blue line wasn't Edler, Tanev, and whoever else we can find. Like that was how the Canucks blue line was built for most of the 2010s. People would have appreciated Edler, Tanev as a good pairing a lot more than they actually did. I remember people complaining about that pairing all the time, also because one of them would always end up getting hurt. But anyways, we're getting a little off topic here, which we tend to do if you're new to the show. So check us out, subscribe everywhere that you can. Live show Monday, Wednesday, Friday during the off season. Okay, Harm, we've touched on the contract. We've touched on Hronek, the player. And again, we touched on the structure of the contract. One thing that people are talking about in the live chat, and you and I want to chat about as well, is what this means for the rest of the Canucks offseason. Obviously, this is very important to get this out of the way early. This is the first domino to fall. It gives you a ton of clarity heading into July 1, and it's certainly not a coincidence that a report came out today, and we've known there's going to be interest for a while, but the report from our pal Frank Saravalli over at dailyfaceoff.com about Jake Guentzel and the Canucks are expected to heavily pursue the strong players for Jake Guentzel, who's slated to hit free agency on July 1st.
Yeah, so according to Cap Friendly, they've got just over $19 million in cap space to address the rest of their offseason needs. Now, they should be in on Jake Guentzel if the opportunity presents itself. I think he's the perfect fit to play with Elias Pettersson. In the past, the knock on him was, or the question mark was, can he produce away from Sidney Crosby? He proved that with conviction during his run with the Hurricanes between the regular season and playoffs combined, produced at over point per game clip. He was the perfect fit with Sebastian Aho, who, in my opinion, plays a pretty similar style to Elias Pettersson, where neither one of Aho or Pettersson are necessarily the biggest or fastest players, but they're elite IQ. They're both quality two-way pivots, and on overall ability and talent, I think they're very, very close, neck and neck. Guentzel being the perfect fit with Aho just affirmed in my mind how well he would mesh in Vancouver. Now, the Canucks can afford to make the big splash and go for a Jake Guentzel at a $9.5 million cap hit or whatever it's going to take. But now that you've signed Hronek, you can't go after Guentzel and also re-sign Nikita Zadorov. I don't think, unless you find a way to get off Ilya Mikheyev's contract. That's one of the things that when I'm looking at the math right now, the Canucks would have to ship out salary if they want Guentzel and Zadorov, which, to be honest, I don't think they need to bring Zadorov back. Would it be nice? Absolutely. He had a monster playoff run, but there are ways to replace him. We've brought up Brendan Dillon on the show before as a player that brings some of those same physical elements, the willingness to stick up with teammates, played in a top four role with Winnipeg, arguably had a better regular season than Nikita Zadorov, is from Vancouver, and will likely clock in at a fraction of the cost that Zadorov will. And that's just one example out of the many that you might find on the free agent market. That's what stands out to me after all of this is I don't think you can afford to pay Zadorov a massive ticket if you also have your eyes on Guentzel.
Okay, so it's a puzzle, right? The Canucks offseason is a puzzle. We've used that analogy a lot. Filip Hronek is a big piece of the puzzle, and they now have it locked in. The way I look at the puzzle, with what you were just saying, is now you have a piece, you have your Zadorov piece, and you have your Gensel piece. And if you want to get both of those to work, you are probably going to have to pay someone to take another piece of your puzzle, Ilya Mikheyev, and take it out, and they'll give you another piece back. My analogy is getting a little foggy here, but you understand what I'm trying to say, that you basically need to make a decision. Like, the Canucks are at a crossroads here where you can either have Zadorov or you can either have Jake Gensel. What do you prioritize if you're in their shoes, Harman? Do you prioritize the top six winger that you know is going to mesh in the top six? Or do you go get that guy who is a bottom four, played really well, but more of a 4-5, 5-6 defenseman in Nikita Zadorov?
This team needs an elite winger. Just there's no getting around it. Look at Florida, right? We know at this point that, okay, the Canucks relative to a team like the Panthers, defensively, yes, their metrics, their defensive profile is very similar, but offensively, the Canucks aren't even close to the Panthers. And you look at what Florida has, Alexander Barkov, who's having a phenomenal playoff run, gets to play with Sam Reinhart and Carter Verhaeghe. We're talking about a guy on one wing who scored 57 goals this year, and a guy on the other wing who's been a 40-goal scorer and has been a clutch playoff performer. Like, no wonder Alexander Barkov is having a terrific playoff run, because he's got help, he's got installation, he's got support. And then on top of that, on the quote-unquote second line, they've got Matthew Tkachuk, who is flat out one of the best wingers in the NHL, right? Whereas the Canucks, they have Brock Besser, and then there's a massive drop-off after that, where, yeah, Connor Garland's great, but ideally he's in a third line role. And to me, it would be such a boon for this organization to add a piece like Gensel, where he's also a proven playoff performer too. He's top 10 all time in goals per game in the playoffs. Plus he has the two-way details, the wall work, the attributes away from the puck to actually be a fit under Rick Tocchet in the way the Canucks play, because that's another thing you always have to be cognizant of, is sometimes you're going to find guys that can rack up points, they can rack up goals, but are they actually going to be a fit defensively? We saw Andrei Kuzmenko 2 years ago have a phenomenal campaign, be the perfect offensive fit with Pettersson, but then just couldn't work with Rick Tocchet in the way this Canucks team wanted to defend. You don't have to worry about any of that with Gensel. Not to mention, and this is one of the biggest advantages, yes, in free agency, sometimes you have to modestly overpay, but the upside is that you're not having to pay an arm and a leg on the trade market to find that top line winger. You're not having to give up a top prospect or a future first round pick, a massive haul to get a Nick Ehlers, get a Martin Necas, and those assets can then be deployed. Maybe not this offseason, maybe it's at the deadline, maybe it's next summer. You have those assets to further bolster your roster. So for all those reasons, I just think Zadorov as a number 4-5 defenseman, you can find other number 4-5 defensemen. You may not find the exact Zadorov replica. You may not find the perfect stylistic fit, but you can find number 4-5 defensemen with abundance, with ease. The Canucks, this management group has done that many times. You can't do that with an elite winger.
No, you simply can't. And there's a few things that I want to touch on here. One of them being that first of all, the chat, everybody's saying Gensel. There's a couple people saying Zadorov, but even the people who really, really like Zadorov are saying, yeah, I love Big Z, but PD really needs a winger. One thing that I kind of thought about here, Harm, is that what we're seeing right now in the playoffs with Florida, one of their star players in Matthew Tkachuk is not producing. What does it look like when the Canucks have a star player, Elias Pettersson, not producing in the playoffs? They get bounced in the second round. And I know it's a little more complicated than that, but my point is just that Florida has enough firepower that even with one of their top guys being, I don't call him a no-show, his effort's been there and everything, but not being able to produce at the rate that they would expect from him, they're still a win away from winning the cup, despite him not having the best postseason to this point. So that's the kind of depth, that's the kind of firepower that you want up front. And ultimately, it's like you said, it is much harder to replace Jake Gensel than it is to replace Nikita Zadorov. So I think for that reason, I'm also on board with the Gensel train over Zadorov here. One person I'd like to get their thoughts on is Rick Tocchet. We can give some truth here to Rick Tocchet because you can't really ask him this question after the signings have happened. But If we could ask Rick Tocchet, who a couple days ago on the Chirp with Darren Millard, we've covered that a lot over at CanucksArmy.com. Go check it out. Tocchet spoke about wanting to open up the system a little bit more, create more off the rush. He also wants those big defensemen, right? Like, these are two things Rick Tocchet wants for his team. So what does Rick Tocchet want more? Does he want Nikita Zadorov, or does he want Jake Gensel more? Not to speak for him, but I also think that when you look at the offense and, how the Canucks became ineffective a little bit at producing offense in the playoffs, I would assume the head coach is leaning Gensel here as well.
For sure. And what I think a coach like Tocchet will appreciate about Gensel is that he isn't a one-trick pony offensively. He's diverse. He can score in multiple different ways. Yeah, he's got the shot off the rush, but he's also got such a knack for getting open. One of the smartest wingers that you're going to see, and that's why he was the perfect fit, the best winger that Sidney Crosby has ever had, because very few wingers in the NHL can think the game at a similar level as Sidney Crosby. Jake Gensel was one of those rare players, and that's why even before Gensel had proven it with Carolina that, hey, he can produce away from Crosby, even just watching him play in Pittsburgh, the way that Gensel would execute give and goes with Crosby, the way Gensel understood spacing, how he understood how to get open in the slot, how he supported the puck, his underrated passing ability. It wasn't as simple as, like, a lot of people would assume, oh, Crosby's doing all the heavy lifting and Gensel's just firing backdoor tap-ins or something like that. No, it was a genuinely mutually beneficial partnership where both guys were elevating each other. And so Gensel's a player, again, he can create off the rush, he can create off the cycle, which is important for a Canucks team that wants to diversify the number of ways in which they can create offense. Versatile. He's such a versatile offensive piece in that way.
Okay, it's not a full show, so we're not doing a structured anyone else segment, but we do have a lot of people in the YouTube live chat. So again, if you're new here, folks, we are live Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 p.m. right here on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts at Canucks Conversation. And Patrick Alvin is going to speak at 4 o'clock. We'll be off air at that point, but you can go read all about the availability. We're going to have takes from Jeff Patterson and other contributors over at CanucksArmy.com. So make sure you head on over to CanucksArmy.com. Turn on notifications. You'll be notified when we post articles. We've been posting a lot lately. And of course, Harman as well. You guys are going to have stuff at The Athletic about this as well, I'm sure. So lots of content to get out there. But let's see what the people are saying, Harm. This is from Jeremy Lee. I really hope Hronek pans out. He has to be able to drive a line on his own. I disagree to some extent, because we've obviously talked about how he's a perfect fit for Quinn Hughes, and we've seen that, and we know that there's always that risk if you go out and try and sign someone to be that fit with Quinn Hughes, that's not going to work out. Look at Louis Eriksson with the Sedins. Like, there's always a risk that when you sign a guy, it's not going to work out, and then you have to pivot. We know Hronek works out well with Quinn Hughes, so I don't think he has to drive his own pairing, but I will say this, Harm, if in any case, for whatever reason, Quinn Hughes isn't able to be in the Canucks lineup, knock on wood, and Filip Hronek is thrust into that number one role, I think that's where you'll start to see some criticism. But ultimately, the most important thing is that this is Quinn Hughes' partner, and this is the captain of your team. This is the best partner he's ever played with, and he's now here for 8 more years. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, would it be nice if you had confidence he could drive his own pair? Absolutely. It would make you... it would give you that much more conviction about this contract. But again, they're going to be playing together. So as long as Quinn Hughes is healthy, knock on wood, then you don't have to worry about can Hronek drive his own pair. Now, in terms of living up to this contract, one of the factors where he'll need to be a little bit more consistent, I think, is defensively, where there's a difference between being below average defensively versus at least being average. I think early in Hronek's career, he was sort of thrown to the wolves, playing heavy top pair minutes without a lot of help in Detroit. And so you saw some of the defensive deficiencies in his game. Now, during the 2022-23 season, which was when the Canucks traded for Hronek, he logged a lot of second pair minutes in Detroit. He was sort of anchoring that second pair for them. You saw him improve a lot defensively. I remember watching a ton of Hronek video at the time of the trade of him in Detroit and thinking, okay, this is a player that's improved with some of his, like, he's never going to be a great rush defender, but he's at least not making as many egregious mistakes. He's killing some plays. He's not turning pucks over. Like, he's passable defensively. He's not having a noticeably negative impact in that facet. And it actually struck me that, okay, he might be developing into, yes, he's offensively slanted, but a genuine two-way defenseman. Now, I think this past season with Vancouver, for the first 40 to 50 games, he didn't have many defensive miscues. Sure, there was the occasional gaffe here or there, but I thought he was relatively sturdy. I think down the stretch, of course, we saw the mistakes pile up a little bit more. A couple of plays definitely where he got walked and it sort of looked ugly. If he can maintain a more consistent defensive level, I think that'll be massive in terms of Canucks fans and management believing that, okay, he's actually delivering full value on this contract.
Okay, this one from Reg M. I wanted to get this one. We have 2 pairs set on D. Who else are we targeting? Of course, he's talking about the Canucks. I'm not calling them we. I'm not doing a Luke Gazdick here. Reg is saying we. Brendan Dillon, who else? They basically just need to fill out a third pairing at this point. In an ideal world, it's another one of those Tyler Myers, Carson Soucy types that could play third minutes, but it's like Dan Murphy said on yesterday's show. We had Murph on. If people are new, you want to go back and listen. We had Murph on yesterday, had a really good conversation. He made a really good point that the bottom 4 of the defense is kind of this blurred line. There's no true third pairing, and I think that's a good way to construct your defense, where you can go out and put either your second or third pairing out against whoever. You had Soucy, you had Myers as your second pairing in the playoffs. Do you expect they'll be in on Brendan Dillon? Like, they've got to replace Nikita Zadorov at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, also bring back Myers. When you look at some of the other free agents, guys that maybe won't cost as much, Alexander Carrier could be interesting in Nashville. He stands out to me because he's played tough minutes against above average competition. He drives good defensive results. Now, the reason he doesn't get as much credit or fanfare, or the reason why he's not going to cost a lot, is because he's a tad undersized. But watching him play in the first round against Vancouver, I think you could tell that he's absolutely a gamer. He's one of those competitive types that plays much bigger than his size. And so at the right price, to have him further down the lineup on your blue line, and to have confidence that, hey, he can step up into the top 4 if necessary, and he won't skip a beat. That's an intriguing name to keep an eye on. I also wonder if Oliver Shillington will hit the free agent market in Calgary over there. He could be really interesting because Shillington in 2021-22, he broke out as a second pair defenseman playing next to Chris Tanev. He had 9 goals, 31 points, beautiful skater. He gives you some of that speed and mobility, but he's not undersized, right? He's more of a tall, lanky type at around 6 feet, 6'1". So you don't have to worry about size there. He, of course, had to step away for about 18 to 20 months, leave hockey because he wanted to take care of his mental health. He came back in late January, and in 33 games coming back, I thought he looked pretty promising considering how much time he'd missed. I'm sure the Flames would like to re-sign him, but if they can't pull that off, then Shillington could be intriguing to me because he's not going to cost a lot considering how much time he's missed over the last 2 seasons. And yet I look at him as a player that's 27 years old and may have the right blend of ability and upside to develop into more than just your typical third pair defender.
What I'm hearing is that it's much easier to fix this part of the puzzle and find these parts of your defense puzzle and find these pieces than it is to replace Quinn Hughes' partner. If you're just joining us, once again, we keep having the number go up. 8 years, $7.25 million annually for Filip Hronek on a very front-loaded contract. You're going to have to go back and watch it. I'm not doing that salary breakdown again, but ultimately a good contract that we both think has the potential to look like a great contract in just a couple of years. And with that in mind, you could make, like, I'm not going to fight you if you say this is a great contract. I think it's a good one right now, and it has the potential to be really, really great in just a couple of years. And I'll say it again, I think people are going to be surprised on July 1 what these defensemen end up signing for on the open market. 8 years for Hronek, $7.25 million. Okay, I'm being told by our guest producer, Jacob Lazare, that Jeff and Jeff Patterson and Irfan Gaffar are going to be recording Rink Wide tomorrow morning. The show should be up later in the morning, so we just wanted to give that a little plug. Go subscribe to Rink Wide Vancouver. If you're new here, during the season, Rink Wide Vancouver is a post-game show with our man Jeff Patterson. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to the Canucks Army YouTube channel once again. Harman, anything else that you wanted to say before we close out this emergency show?
No, I mean, I think from a certainty standpoint, having at least another top 4 defender locked up, it matters in terms of, okay, we know we have this piece of the puzzle locked up. Now you can move on to the next piece of business. Now you can map out with certainty the specific targets you want to go after, because when you have several roster holes at the same time, it becomes, you have to map out many different scenarios of, okay, if we re-sign Hronek, then these might be the defensemen and forwards that we have the cap space to go after. But then you also have to plan for, okay, well, what happens if we don't re-sign him? Then these are the other scenarios. These are the other targets we may have. It just simplifies your thought process. You're able to narrow your options down a little bit better, and you're not scrambling as much, because the last thing you want is to end up in a scenario in the offseason where you haven't managed your decisions the right way and you have too many holes with not enough available players left on the market. So this definitely helps for planning purposes to get this done not only well in advance of our arbitration, but well in advance of the NHL draft.
Well in advance of the NHL draft, no arbitration. Good stuff. Good stuff for the Canucks and for Filip Hronek. Okay, folks, if you're a regular listener of the show, you know we were going to do our cap-friendly episode tomorrow, and we got a ton of those, but nobody knew what Hronek was going to sign for. So, Harman, did we just throw out a new call for lineups?
I haven't seen how many of the cap-friendly ones, the ones that were already submitted, included Hronek.
Ooh,
because if a lot of them did, then, and it was around a similar number, then we can still work with it. But
can we salvage it, you think? You don't think we should go new ones? I got 20. How many replies did you get to your tweet? I got 27.
I haven't checked yet.
Okay, you got 0, but you just tweeted it out like an hour ago. I think we're good. I think we could do it again. I think we could tweet it out. People are going to be on Twitter now.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. I'll delete this. Or I won't even delete this tweet. I'll just go back and look for it. So if you're new here, folks, tomorrow at 2 p.m., we're going to do an episode where we look at fan-made, cap-friendly Canucks rosters. Add free agents, add whoever you want. I know I'm doing mine. I'm going to have Jake Gensel on there. I'm going to have Filip Hronek. Everybody's going to have Filip Hronek at this point.
Please be semi-realistic. Don't have like Gensel at 7 million or something like.
It was funny because we tried to do this, or the inspiration for this was that people were sending them to us, and it was like, I don't know why everybody thinks it's so complicated. Here's Chris Tanev at 2.5 million. Here's Jake Gensel at 7.5. And no, you got to be a little realistic here. Don't make us set parameters. Be realistic in what these guys are getting on the open market. So submit those. We'll chat about them tomorrow. But for now, we will sign off. This was a fun episode, Harm. I always say that, but this one was especially fun. It was an emergency edition. So, folks, again, if you're new here, subscribe to the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Turn on automatic downloads on your podcast player, and never miss an episode Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 p.m. and in season, 5 days a week. For my co-host, Harman Dial, and our guest producer, Jacob Lazare, my name is David Quadrelli. Thank you so much for listening to the episode of the Canucks Conversation. Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.